Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Jeff Markley. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm good, Anthony. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for joining us. We were just talking a little bit about our mutual friend, Larry Wardlaw, who I mentioned I have never heard someone say a bad word about. Is that true in your experience?
Can I take the fifth? No, nobody has a bad word to say about Larry.
Well, if we could only all be so lucky. I know that that's not true of me. So we will stray away from that conversation very quickly so you don't start saying bad things about me. But thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking.
Well, as you know, Jeff, we talk about your career path, your organization, some of the things you're working on. And I want to start with career path, because you've been in the nonprofit world for a while, but that's not really where your career started. So tell me, if you can, when did you first start thinking about what you wanted to do? Where did that take you? And when and why did you pivot away from that?
Oh, gosh, that's why you're in charge. Those are good questions. Okay, so, I didn't know what I wanted to do, actually, right out of high school.
Same experience
college.
for me, yeah.
A lot of people know I'm going to college to do this, and this is my career, and I'm set, and I'm good. And I've always been that person who kind of took that road less traveled.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like my brothers and my mom and dad all went to Ball State.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to go to Ball State.
Okay.
Right? So I went to IU.
Mm-hmm.
Further away, big school. And I studied, actually, criminal justice.
Really?
When I was in college.
What led you to that?
I actually loved the coursework.
Okay. All right.
I loved the study of the criminal court system and probation.
Yeah.
I found it really intriguing. I got to visit the state penitentiary in Terre Haute. I think it's Terre Haute.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I got out, I thought, I really don't like the work that's available,
Well,
right?
and I think that's something that a lot of young people don't realize is it's a guess, sometimes an educated guess, sometimes not even an educated guess. And then it's like, oh, I have this degree, but what if I don't want to do that? Yeah.
Well, my very first job out of college, actually, I worked in loss prevention.
Okay.
For a major national retail company,
Which is a really challenging job.
And it was really negative.
Yeah. You're only dealing with people who are in dire circumstances or not so great people, or not, at least not at their best.
Right. And then you're always looking for that.
Yeah.
You're never looking for the good in people. You're always looking for the people who are suspicious or acting funny or so that just didn't last very long, actually. So I did kind of make an early pivot.
And then you decided it wasn't for you.
And I decided it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So then actually I took a job with Park Center. I worked in a group home, an adolescent group home for girls.
Okay.
For about a year and a half.
Okay.
And that was a great eye-opening job. Mm-hmm. The trauma and the experiences that some of those young girls had gone through.
Oh, sure.
Put them in this position was of no fault of their own, really, right? It's the circumstances they're brought up in.
Yeah.
And then that was right around, I graduated in 86. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of right in the height of the AIDS epidemic. Mm-hmm. And it was hitting Fort Wayne.
Yep.
So there was I had been a volunteer with what was then the AIDS Task Force. And there was a position that came open with the local health department for an HIV and AIDS, we call it disease intervention specialist. And it was, people thought I was crazy for applying because the grant was a grant. It was for 6 months only at the time, and it was like $10,000.
Wow. Okay.
But, people talk about kind of having a calling to do something, and it just seemed like it was the right step for me.
Yeah. So that was originally then your entree into that was a city position, a grant-funded position.
Correct.
Okay. So when the 6 months was up, was the job done?
It was not done. It was renewed.
Okay.
It was renewed.
All right.
I stayed in that position for 6 years.
Okay.
Well, actually became, so I was the first HIV and AIDS program coordinator for the city during that time period. Okay. Yeah.
All right. And where do you go from there? I don't want to rely only on what LinkedIn tells me because sometimes LinkedIn is wrong. So where do you go after that position?
Well, so interesting. So I loved the work.
Yeah.
But I will have to say at that time, it was super political.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of challenges from local politicians, people in power.
Yep.
So that became really frustrating. And the other component, again, at the time, because we didn't have any resolution except guided treatment to death, right? Because there was no
pain intervention, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So at one point I thought, I know way too many people in my circle of friends in Fort Wayne who are going to be dead in 10 years. And it was kind of a lot to bear.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Sure.
So took a totally different approach to life and to career. And I was in a relationship with a person who owns a nursery, actually.
Aha.
So I stepped out and I went back to school and just got an associate's in landscape.
Okay.
And then, so I managed a nursery and garden center for about 14 or 15 years.
Okay. And did you work with Laura Stein?
I did work with Laura Stein.
Laura's actually the next guest on the podcast. So it's all very Northeast Nursery-centric episodes coming up.
I love Laura Stein. And our paths continue. We're still really good friends.
She's great.
And our paths cross just like this.
Yeah. Well, great. So sorry, I took us down a path there. But okay, so a complete diversion from what you were doing.
Complete diversion.
And how long do you do that?
So I did that for like 14 or 15 years.
Wow. Okay.
A long time.
All right.
A long time.
Okay.
And the great part about that job was because it was retail, I met so many cool people.
Yeah.
Right? Fort Wayne people.
Sure.
In different circumstances, in positive circumstances. Still friends and have relationships with a lot of those people now.
And did I call it Northeast Nursery? I meant Newhauser. Yeah, there's a place in my hometown called Northeast Nursery. So my Peabody, Massachusetts neurons were firing when they should have been firing towards Fort Wayne.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. No worries. You do that from a long time. You get to interact with people. You enjoy it quite a bit.
Well, and it's positive, right? Because it's landscaping.
Correct.
So people are coming to you because
it's discretionary. I want to do this.
They want.
It's a beautiful setting. They're beautifying their property.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's not what you're still doing. So why did you do something different?
Well, so I needed to segue out of that position in that career. So I just, I've always done that, again, that road less traveled. I've done the things that people don't think you should do.
Yeah.
So I stepped away from that actually with nothing to go to specifically because at the time I thought, as long as I'm in the position I'm in, nobody's going to know that I really am available for something different. So I took the step to step away, which led to like a 2.5-year stint at Williams-Sonoma.
Okay, so retail
as
again,
the general manager.
Generally happy people, although in retail sometimes people aren't so happy. But
correct, you can have
with
all
Williams-Sonoma, it's probably people with some money and they're probably happy about what they're buying for the most part.
For the most part, you get some of those. Sometimes people with money get a little challenging.
Yeah,
too.
There's one in every. I've never borne that burden, so I don't know that personally. But yes,
right.
So you're Williams and Sonoma for a couple years, 2.5 years ish.
Right, and I was all this time I was still involved with what was then the AIDS Task Force. Right, so I was still a volunteer. I'd been one of the founders of what then was the Gay and Lesbian Dinner Dance. Which has now turned into the Soiree this year. And then it just became really clear, I really don't want to be in retail. I don't want to do the holidays, the every weekend.
You're working when everyone else is playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Greg Manifold, who had been the director at the AIDS Task Force, wonderful friend, wonderful guy, had retired. And they'd approached me about perhaps the position once, and I declined because I hadn't been at Williams-Sonoma long enough. I didn't feel fair leaving there and wasn't sure. And then after another year or so, the person they hired also left. And so I kind of revisited that. And so I have been there now. I'm just starting my 10th year as the director of what is now the Northeast Indiana Positive Resource Connection.
Okay. All right. So this is where you've been for quite some time. And tell me what your work involves. Tell me about the organization and the work that you do as the executive director.
Yeah, I love our work and I love our agency. So we're the oldest HIV and AIDS service organization in the state of Indiana.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
We were founded in 1985.
Okay.
Started as a grassroots organization.
Yeah.
So we cover 12 counties in Northeast Indiana. So we have a nice reach. We basically have two components. So we're doing case management for people with HIV or AIDS, which involves anything and everything that might be a barrier to them getting appropriate and
Yeah.
adequate health care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So we're doing food and nutrition. We're
Mhm.
doing transportation,
Yep.
housing, mental health counseling, alcohol and drug counseling.
Yeah.
Anything that's going to, well, and obviously we're getting people linked up with health insurance that they
Mhm.
don't have it, and we're
Yep.
getting them connected with physicians, labs, all those kind of places that they need. And our goal, and Nathan, if you know this, but I know a lot of people don't still, our goal with those people is if you're HIV positive, you know your status,
Mhm.
and you're linked to care and taking your medication,
Mhm.
you can very quickly get to what we call an undetectable viral load.
Mhm. Mhm.
And two things happen at that state. If you're undetectable, you will not go on and develop AIDS.
Mhm.
So you can live a pretty relatively healthy,
Yep.
long life. And then the second factor, we call it treatment as prevention. If you're undetectable, you cannot transmit the virus to anybody else.
Okay.
So even if you're engaging in activities that
Mhm.
otherwise might transmit
Yeah.
it, you can't.
Okay.
So the individual wins
Yeah.
and the community wins,
Okay.
right?
All right. Yeah.
So then our other side of our operations are the prevention,
Mhm.
because ideally we want to prevent somebody
Sure.
from
Sure.
even becoming infected. So we do education, we do testing in all 12 counties. So we go to places like alcohol and drug treatment centers,
Mhm.
halfway houses,
Mhm.
correctional facilities,
Mhm.
the LGBT community events,
Mhm.
to provide education, and then we do the free HIV testing.
Yeah.
And, things have changed, right? So back in the day when I was at the health department, you did a blood draw. It took 2 weeks to get results. If it was positive, you took another blood sample for a confirmatory
Mhm.
and another 2 weeks.
Jeez.
So that's an agonizing
Oh yeah.
2 to 4 week period for people.
Yeah.
So now, you can get results back within minutes.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a much better scenario.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the name change. What precipitated that? Why did the organization decide that it needed to rebrand, and what was your involvement in that?
So I had been at the agency maybe a year or two,
Mhm.
and I was just looking at our stats.
Yeah.
And the majority of our clients at that point were HIV positive,
Mhm.
but did not have AIDS.
Okay.
So the AIDS part of our name was a little bit of a misnomer,
Yeah.
right? And it was also kind of a dark cloud hanging out there for anybody that used our services,
Sure.
that eventually I'm going to get AIDS.
Yeah. Well, and as difficult as a topic as it might be, Indiana's reputation was not great when it came to AIDS, based on Ryan White and some of the
Correct.
things that had happened early on. Not that you want to distance the organization from that, because it's an important part of your mission, but the stigma changed, and some of those things too. So tell us more about that name change and some of the other things that you decided needed to have more light shown on them in terms of your mission.
Well, right. So we took, this was a year process,
Yeah.
right? So we
Yeah.
involved the board, we
Mhm.
involved staff,
Yep.
clients, and community members.
Yep.
And the other part, task force, we were 30 years in or
Mhm.
25 years in. By definition, we were no longer a task force,
Yeah.
right?
And if you were doing a very
Right.
good job.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
none of it just made sense to maintain
Sure.
that.
Sure.
And I'll say we also had, we had clients. You talked about stigma.
Mhm.
So they would take their case manager's business card, which said AIDS Task Force, and they would rip the AIDS part off, so that if anybody found the business card or saw
Wow.
it,
Wow.
they wouldn't know what it was related to.
Wow. Wow.
So, like I said, we took a year
Yeah.
to figure this out, because
Yeah.
we wanted to know what the impact would be on the community, our
Mhm.
clients, everybody, funders. And it just made sense that we needed to kind of become a little bit more relevant.
Mhm.
It also allowed us to expand our purpose and mission a little bit.
Mhm.
So, for instance, we've added hepatitis
Mhm.
to our repertoire of,
Mhm.
of infections that we manage.
Mhm.
Really wouldn't have fit under our previous mission and name.
Yeah.
So
Is that primarily because of a need in the community, an unmet need? Were there other factors that drove the expansion of the mission?
the need, and there's often a co-infection of
Mhm.
HIV and
Ah,
hepatitis.
okay.
So
Yeah.
it just kind of made sense.
Yep.
for that marriage to happen.
Sure. And what does the organization look like? You're obviously the person who sits in the executive director chair, but what does the team look like? And you can include in that board and volunteers, but also staff. How big is the organization, and what do the different folks who are involved, how do they contribute to the mission?
It's interesting because that's one thing I think that people have a misconception about. Because it started as a grassroots organization with no budget, no paid staff. So, our budget this year is about $1.6 million.
Yeah. Okay.
We have 20 staff members.
Yep.
So it is sizable.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Again, when we first started, it was 100% volunteers doing the things that nobody would allow us to do at this point.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge because we can't use volunteers in the same way we used to because of HIPAA, because of confidentiality.
Yeah.
The need has changed. So we always struggle a little bit trying to find a way to work volunteers in, because we want to, and we have people who want to volunteer, but it's just a different game than it was 30 years ago.
Sure. And you have to put your stakeholders first, your key stakeholders, those you serve.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, Jeff, what are some of the things that are taking up most of your time and attention? And you can include in this not just what you do at Positive Resource Connection, but also in volunteer efforts. What are some of the things that are the biggest rocks that you're trying to move forward, if you will, in your professional life?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones on our prevention side is PrEP. So PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's another huge tool in the toolbox to prevent anybody from becoming infected. So basically, it's one pill that somebody can take once a day.
Yep.
And if they are consistent with that, they will not become HIV positive, even if they engage in activities with somebody who is HIV positive.
Yeah.
So we need to move that program harder and a little faster, I think. Make it more accessible, approachable. We can, again, with that, we can assist with the cost of that. We can assist with getting the lab work done. It all can be done through our office and our clinic. That's one of our biggest areas. And kind of combined with that is when we look at the disparities of HIV in the Black community, again, it's not acceptable. So we've worked really hard and are working hard now to, again, make ourselves accessible and approachable. I don't really buy into the idea of, when we talk about, some communities are just hard to reach. Almost like that gives you an out for the reason that you're not serving them well.
Sure.
And,
well, it's pushing the blame onto someone else, blaming the victim, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think our job is, how do we make ourselves more accessible and approachable and trustworthy?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm really excited about, which is actually, our timing is good. It's happening next week. We are having an HIV in the Black community event.
Okay.
I've got an individual, his name is Surratt King from Chicago, works with Gilead Pharmaceutical. He's a community liaison, not a drug rep. He's an African-American man. He's coming in, and we have about 20 leaders and community members from the African-American community that we're going to meet for dinner.
Okay.
We're going to have a little kind of HIV in the Black community 101 and see what kind of, partnerships or what kind of efforts will come out of that.
Okay.
So super excited about that.
For sure. Well, in general, you serve a lot of different parts of the community, but what are some of the things you do to raise awareness, and what are some of the challenges you face? In other words, what are some of your best tools for getting the word out about the work you do, and what are some of the things that prevent you from doing more of it?
Well, preventing us from doing things, money's always an issue, right?
Yeah.
We can get grants, we can get funding for programs for staff, but in marketing, right? That's always a challenge.
Sure.
Although we have gotten some, because we've worked with you, and you guys have always done a great job for us. So, we've in the last 5 years, maybe, we've brought on a community events manager. So Alex Sauer is great, and she does our social media, which has been really helpful. We have a new website, so working those angles. Trying to be present. I think one of my main jobs is being the networker, being the relationship builder. So attending events, meeting with people, it's important for other leaders to know that we exist and
Yeah.
other agencies to know that we exist and what we do,
Mm-hmm.
so that as they go through their day
Yeah.
and they're encountering individuals who might be in need of our services,
Sure.
they know who to refer to.
Yeah.
And it's not a cold call.
Yeah.
They'll know us, and
Sure.
we can go from there. So that's been really great. Um,
How, if at all, and you can tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and you would not be the first person to say that, and be accurate by the way. How at all has the work changed over the past couple of years with the pandemic? We're seeing a lot, more debate about science and prevention and these things that, I'll go on the record as saying 5 years ago, I didn't think we're all that controversial. But how has that changed your work at all? Has it impacted you, or has it been pretty much business as usual for you, maybe with some changes in how you get the message out and how you connect with people? Any impact there?
Sure. I mean, the impact definitely during the pandemic was we did almost no HIV
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah.
The facilities that we normally go to,
Mm-hmm.
we were all on lockdown.
Yeah, sure.
So we didn't go there. We didn't have a lot of people coming into our office.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was this inherent apprehension about going to medical
Yeah.
facilities.
Yeah, for sure.
So testing dropped way off.
Yeah.
And then when things kind of slowed, or, when the pandemic slowed down a little bit, we anticipated a faster, more, a stronger bounce back in people getting tested, which has not happened.
Yeah.
It's been slow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a little bit of people being overwhelmed and satiated with getting tested, prevention, treatment, all of that has been so prevalent in the news.
Yeah, just fatigue over the whole topic. Yeah, unfortunately.
Well,
yeah.
and then we also are on the cutting edge right now of monkeypox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have been kind of charged with heading up some of that for the local area.
Yeah.
And, the facts are the facts. So right now, monkeypox tends to be in populations where it's, men who are having sex with men.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's the sexual act that transmits, it's just the intimacy and the close proximity. And it got a foothold in that community first. Apparently.
Sure.
But then again, you're talking about vaccinations, and it's a 2-shot process.
Yep.
One and then another month later.
Yeah.
So we've had good response, but we've also had some challenges, I think, with people just being, like you said, fatigued with vaccinations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and from the limited knowledge I have from my small circle, I think everyone is just a little bit more cautious about healthcare in general, in ways that might have long-term negative effects. And I think there were some positive effects. I mean, my hope is for your organization, like others, people are more comfortable with things like, telemedicine that might lead to earlier intervention. I think that's a good outcome of all this, but it's definitely a mixed bag for all of us.
Well, interesting. So we found during the pandemic when we went remote and we did a lot of the telehealth, the no-show rates by clients and patients dropped precipitously.
Yeah.
Did I say that correctly? Precipitous. That's a big word.
It sounded good to me. Yeah.
On a Tuesday. So because it was easy, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of our clients who have to
transportation sometimes an issue.
Yes.
And if you're not feeling well, it's much more difficult to take yourself somewhere than to just flip on a screen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we forget if we're used to just driving to an appointment and back.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an hour.
Yeah.
But if you're taking, thank goodness we have public transportation.
Yeah.
But it could be several hours to get from bus to bus to a place.
For sure.
And then you have to wait because you got there early, and then you have your appointment, and then you have to wait.
And that's not even factoring in, do I have to, miss work? Is that even allowed? How flexible is that? I mean, there was a point, Jeff, where I say this a lot, but I think it was just yesterday. I said, how did anybody do this before we had as much flexibility? And I'm very fortunate that I don't have some of those barriers.
Right.
But I was like, how did I live when I actually had to go somewhere every day at a certain time? How did I get anything done? And when you factor in health concerns and other factors, It's a very different world in some ways, a better one. And that earlier intervention and that lower instance of people being no-shows, I think is hopefully a big boon to the work you do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's taught us, right? We don't have to do things the way we did them before because
Yeah.
we thought they were prescribed that we had
Yeah.
to do them that way.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
We all learned that.
Mhm.
We can do things differently, and we're not breaking any laws.
Yeah.
We're not,
Yeah.
being unethical.
Well, when it's your only option, you realize it's not all that bad, and
Right.
can be as good as, or at least only marginally worse than the option that's way more difficult.
Right.
Tell me about your board, and don't need to get into too many details, but the makeup of your board. How do you find good board members? How do you keep good board members? And how do they impact the work you do? I ask this question out of personal curiosity because I have been both the victim of boards and a board member. So how does that fit into your organization?
Yeah, our board's pretty important.
Mhm.
And we typically have a really good board.
Yeah.
I think if you want to be on our board, it's because you've got a connection, you're passionate or compassionate about it.
Yep.
So we have a good mix,
Mhm.
like any board
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
So, we have our expertise in finance and in
Mhm.
legal issues and marketing.
Yeah.
But we also have just general community members,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Who are representative of the populations we serve. It's always a challenge. I mean, a lot,
Mhm.
the good people are always sought out
Sure.
for multiple
Sure.
boards.
Sure.
But I think once we have people on our board, they don't leave
Yeah.
unless it's because they're moving out of town or there's some other circumstance.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to hear that you put the passion piece first, because I've been on boards where it's kind of like, we need someone with a financial background. This guy, has that. Let's put him on the board. And he's like, where am I and what does this organization do?
Right.
Where I've seen board members really thrive is when they're first really invested in the cause one way or another. And it sounds like you've made that a priority. And I'm sure that's a difference maker in terms of retaining board members.
I think it is. And it's the one thing that I know we do different than a lot of boards. A lot of boards will have a financial giving requirement
Yes.
of a certain level.
Mhm.
And we don't do that
Mhm.
because we don't want to exclude somebody who has the passion but maybe doesn't have a financial resource.
Yeah.
So, the resources people bring are it's their passion, it's their time, it's their energy.
Yeah.
We love it if they can bring money along
Sure.
with it, but it's not a requirement for us.
Well, I think it's great that you make that clear up front. I think where that gets problematic is when there are unspoken expectations. When someone isn't told coming in the door, hey, we expect you to give, or they're not giving the relief of, hey, this isn't a requirement, it's nice if you can. There have been times when I was younger and served on a board, and it was like, well, of course you're supposed to give. And I was like, I just didn't know that. I've never done this before. So I think it's great that you make that clear, and starting with what's most important to the organization, we have people who care
Right.
and are going to be here for the right reasons. I think that's great. Well, I want to pivot to a few more quick hit questions. The answers don't necessarily need to be quick hit, but the questions will be, hopefully.
Okay.
First is about your career. You've done a lot of different things. You've tried things and realized they weren't for you. And then you found something, or at least appears you have, Jeff, that is really where your passion lies. What's your best advice for others when it comes to building a successful career and a fulfilling career?
Well, it's going to be different, obviously, for different people. I think
Yeah.
what's worked for me is I've always been relationship driven
Mm-hmm.
for the purpose of the relationship, not as an opportunity.
As a means to an end.
Right.
Yeah.
So having those relationships has been really critical in people who have mentored me
Mm-hmm.
along my path, people who have connected me with
Mm-hmm.
other individuals or other
Yeah.
organizations has been really critical. So I think it's really important, especially if you're going to be in the nonprofit world.
Mm-hmm.
Know your community.
Yeah.
Know the other social service organizations. Do your research. Don't hesitate. I did it when I started this job or other jobs. I'll call somebody up and say, I did it with, oh, bless her heart, Community Harvest Food Bank,
Mhm.
Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And I called Jane. I said, would you have lunch with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been around longer, and I would love to know what your insights are.
Oh, sure.
And it was great.
Yeah.
One of the key things she told me was, one of your main responsibilities as a director of a non-for-profit is to protect your non-for-profit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that is secure in order for you to provide the services that you're providing.
Yeah, well, especially when you have a team of 20, your role it's a lot of things, but it's primarily relationship builder and advocating for the organization, and then letting the team do what they do well, but really advocating for them and protecting them so that they can do the work that's going to help the organization thrive. And that's all about relationships.
I love relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and relationships don't happen always quickly.
Correct.
Right? They have to be nurtured.
Yeah.
You have to allow organic time. I always talk about organic things. For me, they kind of have to happen organically.
Well, and I like what you said about not having it as a means to an end. I mean, there's a lot of I talk to a lot of college students, and I talk a lot about relationships because I tell people, and I mean this 100%, that anything good that's ever happened to me in my professional life and in my personal life is because of somebody else, somebody who pointed someone in my direction or who saw something in me I didn't see in myself, right? So that's, to me, a no-brainer. But when I talk to young people, I say, you got to be patient, you got to be flexible. And it's not always linear. It's not you do something good for someone on Tuesday and on Wednesday they're going to pay that back. They may never pay it back. But a lot of, just as you've alluded to, a lot of success is making as many connections, positive connections, if I will, with people, and then just kind of hanging around
right,
and waiting for those dots to connect in the universe. And that's really, I think that's part of the secret, if you will.
Well, right. And even if the dots don't connect career-wise, you're still a better person, right?
For sure.
Because you know more people. You now know more people's backgrounds, different lifestyles and culture.
Yeah.
So it's never a negative.
Well, and even when it's, in 2022, newsflash listeners, there's a lot of people who aren't going to think like any of us, who are going to have very different beliefs and worldviews, but you still want those folks in your network so that you can learn from them. And there's times when, I've left conversations very angry, but said, okay, I understand that perspective better.
Right.
I think that's critically important today when, social media is a double-edged sword. We can shut off all the voices we don't like, but I think it's important to let some of those in. There was a quote I heard the other day, and I'm going to botch it, but it basically said that empathy does not equal agreement, right? You can empathize with someone. That doesn't mean you agree with them, but the world needs a lot more relationship building, not just with the people who, sorry, I'm going off on a soapbox here.
Go ahead.
But I really believe in the power of relationships, and, people will surprise you sometimes too,
right,
if you let different perspectives in.
Well, and right, don't you think part of the key on that is like you just said, you don't have to agree, but if you can get to a place where you can try to understand their thinking or where they're coming from, it can cause you to think about things differently and to think about them a little differently.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure. To kind of understand the humanity behind whatever issue it is, to understand, there's probably a reason people think what they think, and there's probably at least some things we have in common if we give it enough time.
Right.
Some people will exhaust your patience before that time, is there, but certainly I think it's something that, especially in a community like, I've lived here now. I've lived in Northeast Indiana for more than half my life, and this is home now, but it's a conservative community. And, when you're doing work with people who are underserved, I'm sure you run into challenges that, but you got to be open to different perspectives because you need the whole community.
Right. We can't close that door.
Yeah.
I can't close that door.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because then we're done.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to keep dialogue going. You have to keep relationship going.
Yeah.
Even if you're not on the same page all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that got really deep, Jeff. We went down a path there.
I know.
And I think I took us there.
100%. You were driving.
Okay.
I put my seatbelt on.
All right. Next question has to do with your organization. What's something you think that is underappreciated that deserves to be better known about your organization, or a myth or misconception that you want to clear up about your organization?
Well, again, I think people might be surprised to know. I mean, we are the only game in town.
Mm-hmm.
We are the only organization that does what we do in all of Northeast Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
We don't charge for any of our services.
Yep.
And I am a firm believer that, we talk about, especially recently, ending the HIV and Hep C epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
So, we talk about zero is possible. So 0 new infections is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at it from a global perspective, for that to happen globally, we have to do our part in our 12 counties in Northeast Indiana where it can't happen.
Yeah.
So we're this little cog that impacts the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important, one, for people just to realize that truth.
Yeah.
And to know that, thank goodness we don't see visibly AIDS like we did 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it still is here.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
It
Sure.
hasn't gone away. So that whole idea of prevention and getting tested, if nobody's ever been tested, they should get it tested at least once.
Mm-hmm.
And for the younger generation, we recently did a monkeypox clinic at the local bar, and we also did HIV testing that night.
Yep.
And we had a number of young men who were in mid-20s to 30s who had never had an HIV test done before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a concern.
Yeah, well, it's the downside of some of the stigma going away is that there's not as much of a sense of urgency, I would think.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we still need to get that word out that, get tested.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have any risk activities, let's talk about PrEP, right? Because that's what's going to keep you safe.
Yep. Yep.
And we want to do this in a very positive, non-judgmental manner.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
We're about the humanity of all this. We're not about the moral issues, the judgment of anybody's activities.
Yeah.
We care about the people.
For sure. Well, and if you ever were to stray in that area, then you're going to lose people, and you're not going to have the opportunity to get them the education and the help they need.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Next question. This is, I think, the second to last question, so you're almost off the hook.
Okay.
What is a tool, a trick, a tip, a hack, something you use in your work that is helpful to you? Now, I've had people say Google, so that's a fair answer. I've had people say pen and paper. What do you use day to day that you really rely on that you think deserves a little bit of positive PR, if you will?
Okay, so people might chastise me for this, but honestly, so I do a check-in on Facebook a lot.
Okay, all right.
And here's the reason.
Yeah.
You can find out a lot about what's going on through Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? So I can find out about events.
Yeah.
I can check up, I don't like stalk people, but you could check on, hey, so what's somebody doing or what's going on there?
Yeah.
It helps keep me in the know a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah.
It's like this is a little sidebar. I have a new financial advisor, and it was so wild. The first time I went in to meet him, he had a picture on his television of a place in Uganda, and I'm like, oh my God! I said, I have been there. Not even thinking anything, right? I'm like, that is so weird that you have that up there. And then we're talking a little bit more, and he brings something else up, and I'm like, how did you? And he's like, oh no, I checked your Facebook bio, right?
Yeah.
So he knew all this stuff, which helps make relations.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, and I'll go on the record as being of two minds with Facebook. I left Facebook personally. I've left it twice, once for 4 years, and now the past couple of years. But the reason I came back to it the last time was I was missing stuff. There was stuff I was like, oh, I really wish I had known about it, whether it was an event or something that happened in someone's life. And there's now enough social media that there's other ways to get there with people. But it is, I think sometimes we forget, it can be a great tool if you use it well for understanding people, for connecting the dots, for really building relationships, and for doing a little bit of sneaky productive stalking sometimes. Yes, it can be very helpful. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Actually, the last guest I just spoke with mentioned Facebook groups and connecting with people as a peer, not as an expert, but as a peer within those groups is really helpful. It changes the game. Right. So I don't think you're alone in that one at all, even though it sometimes seems like Facebook doesn't have a lot of fans these days.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I try to stay away from that. I mean, I used to engage more in some of the controversial topics. And, that's not what it's for. And that just gets frustrating. So I
Yeah.
just stepped away from those things. And, I post pictures of my dog. And
Yeah, some of it for me was the realization that I didn't have the discipline to shut up. And the world doesn't really need my opinion. I mean, part of it was me saying the time that I'm spending here screaming at the walls, I probably should reinvest that in the people I could really influence, which is, if on a good day, is maybe like 9 people. Focus on them. Don't try to
Right.
change everyone's mind. And if nothing else, it has brought my blood pressure down a
Yep.
couple
Perfect.
points.
See?
Yeah.
Helpful.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been really great. I really appreciate your willingness to talk with us and the great work your organization does. If people want to learn more about your organization, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, the best place would be our new website that Azure Agency produced for us.
Aha.
Which is,
That was a sneaky little, I wasn't even know it was self-promotion,
Yeah,
but it was, yes.
It was. PositiveResourceConnection.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Anthony. This was really fun.
And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Azure Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.